Good morning, and thank you. My name is Tim Guesswin. I am General Counsel for the Nevada State Contractors Board. As the Executive Officer, Margie Greene, shared with you, this bill was a collaborative effort, and the Board was happy to participate during its formation. Importantly, there are a number of requirements for any contract now regarding residential solar photovoltaics. Now, this is just for home use. So industrial, scale or industry scale, not approached by the statute. One of the major requirements, of course, is a written contract, and inside that contract there must be specific items so that consumers are aware of what they're buying and what they're going to own. One of the things is that if the representation is made during the sales process, those representations must be honored. Persons, if they're financing, they have a right of rescission. They must be told at the time of contracting what the price per kilowatt hour is in their utility area. That way persons can make an informed decision about the purchase decision. These items, we hope, will help inform consumers and allow them to make better decisions and more fully understand what they have purchased and the benefits they hope to receive. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Would it be appropriate for me to talk about California legislation relating to solar at this time?
Certainly.
Okay. Well, I previously discussed the the budget augmentation relating to the recovery fund, establishing the recovery fund. But there's another solar bill that's pending that I think is very relevant to the discussion today. And the sponsor of this bill is the Dolores Huerta Foundation, who I previously referenced. And it really goes to the heart of some of the misrepresentation, in that we have had solar contractors in California argue the work they're doing is not home improvement. They're installing solar panels on top of the roof, and they may be leased, and whoever's leasing them, actually, they argue, owns it, so they don't become actually part of the fixed works. And we disagree with that, but we want to make it very clear. We worked with the Dolores Huerta Foundation on this bill. Make it very clear that a residential solar energy system is home improvement, because that kicks in notice requirements. It kicks in the payment restrictions we already discussed. The other problem that we have in California is that you can become a registered salesperson, as Board Member Mark asked. I mean, salespeople can pose a problem. They get registered themselves, and in California, they need to be tied to a licensed contractor. They go out and knock on a door. They got to explain to that potential customer what contractor they're represented. They're given a pocket license to identify themselves. Unfortunately, we have solar brokers here in California. I'd be interested to find out if you have them in Nevada. What they're doing is knocking on doors, they're advertising, and they're trying to obtain potential solar customers to sell that lead to the highest bidder. Make that really clear. No, not acceptable. You got to identify yourself as representing a licensed contractor before you solicit, negotiate, or you execute a contract for a solar project. And the other issue is a lot of solar work is funded by the Property Assessed Clean Energy Funding, or PACE. And I'm really curious to find out if you have this in Nevada. I suspect you may. So what happens with a PACE loan is, this is in California, the PACE lender will pay the contractor directly. And you don't see that in other industries. You want to get a roof on, you want to get a loan from your bank, you as the consumer would obtain that loan proceeds and you would disperse that to your contractor. But with many of these PACE loans, they pay the contractor directly. The consumer may or may not have authorized that, but the contractor's been paid, the work may not have been done. And so what this bill would do is make it very clear that the payment restriction we already discussed relates to a payment made by a third-party lender. And that's really, I think, important to changing the business model that some solar contractors have. And I don't want to paint the solar industry with a broad brush, because I know many solar contractors do a fantastic job. It's just there's some out there that have taken advantage of consumers, and it's our job to remove them from the marketplace. And I believe this bill that's pending will help us to further define the rules and give us a more effective tools in regulating the industry. But again, I'd be interested to find out from Nevada if you have the same problem with the salespeople, with the third-party lenders.
Good morning, Paul Rosario again, State Contractors Board, Nevada. To Mr. Vogt's question, yes, we've had issues in the past where complaints have come in relative to salespeople. We've drawn the line prior to this legislation that if anybody's going to sign the contract must be a licensed contractor. Somebody trying to solicit leads, somebody who's selling leads to a solar contractor, we do not regulate that. If they are involved in the advertising or the sale or the signing of the contract, yes, we do regulate that, and we would consider they would have to be a W-2 employee of the contractor to sign those contracts. If they are not a W-2 employee of a contractor, they are an unlicensed contractor in the state of Nevada. So I hope that kind of clears things. Now, relative to, I know that what Mr. Gesswein had stated, the new legislation does require that the contractor is going to be held responsible for any oral promises or agreements that are made by the salesperson to the homeowner, which could put, as far as investigations is concerned, which would be somewhat, could be problematic in the sense as this is what this person said, it's a lot of hearsay, But obviously, if there's something written down, notes that are taken by the homeowner, or there's emails back and forth with the homeowner on certain things, then the contractor will be held accountable for whatever promises are made by that salesperson. Again, if anybody who's signing that contract has to be a licensed contractor or an employee of the licensed contractor, a W-2 employee, no 1099, a W-2 employee of that contractor.
Yeah, I have a question. In California, we have the Solar Association specific to California, and as far as getting information out to try to regulate the marketplace, keep it clean, they've been effective in working with us to do that, recognizing that most contractors are doing it right, and help us to educate the ones that aren't. Do you have a similar solar association in Nevada?
Yes, there is. It is a solar association that's for, it's not only companies, solar companies, but it's also what I would consider solar enthusiasts, because there's a lot of people out there that are very pro-green and part of the organization. We've spoken to them. They put out bulletins. They've been very open to our suggestions and providing us a platform to basically put out our concerns relative to the industry. So they've been very good in dealing with it. Again, and it's something that Senator Brooks on the legislation, he reached out to them and the major players within the solar industry in order for the passage of 303, which we think is, as I stated, is going to be somewhat very positive steps forward for public protection.
Actually, it's on your bill, your 303 here. Is there you said it's for residential, but is there a limit on the KW, like a certain size where you might not class that as residential? Or is it just flat out, if it's going in residential, it'll apply to that?
Tim Gesswein responding. So at this moment, we haven't actually figured out how this is going to go perfectly, but I'm very much aware that Nevada Energy, one of the major providers of electrical services in Nevada, they'll have tariff rates as well. So we're going to have to be coordinating and making sure that what happens at the PUC level, the Public Utility Commission level, and at the Contractors Board are working in harmony. That was discussed during the legislative process. And we've always viewed single-family residence as what is more traditionally considered, a stick-built home on a foundation. So if, to say, a condominium association, to top their tower, they wanted to add solar, I do not believe at this time this bill would affect that.
Actually, I have a question. So you mentioned the bill with Mr. Brooks and all of the, sounds like stakeholder meetings, meetings with the association, and certainly yourselves. And so I'm always curious, in today's world, what came out of that that changed your tactics? Was it more consumer, proactive information you put out there? I mean, it must have been interesting and impacted the way you treat this, so we're curious to find out.
Thank you. We did have a series of meetings with the senator and also the solar industry, and they provided a lot of input. Mr. Guestwine was involved in drafting the legislation as well, so we would take different ideas away from our meeting, and they gave us an insight because we're looking at it from a regulatory process. They're looking at it from a business practice, but they had a vested interest, and we were able to, the bill passed with no opposition at all. So those reputable solar contractors and their industry associations worked with us. So some of the things we changed were concerning because we started with the model that we had used on the pool contractors, and then we realized this doesn't apply, that doesn't apply, and they added constructive feedback as to what we should do. So we did make a few changes at the end, and Mr. Guestwine, if you'd like to come up to the table again. But it was really, the process overall was very great to have everybody at the table and discussing it before we got to the legislature. And that was what the senator wanted, was that we had all of this worked out before we presented it to the committee. So it passed with no opposition in either house.
Thank you.
I don't know if you'd like Mr. Guestwine to add to that, or?
Thank you, Tim Guestwine, Nevada State Contractors Board. Yes, the process was very cooperative, very positive. In fact, some of the most beneficial notions came from industry participants, specifically contractors. For instance, earlier I talked about providing these homeowners with knowledge about the kilowatt hour rate they would pay under their existing tariff for the utility, and that should be included in the contract. That idea, the genesis, was with a contractor. So the contractor essentially was suggesting language that would help consumers make a more informed decision. I thought that was a tremendous thing for that contractor to do, to say, shop around. I thought that was really great. Another comment that came from was a requirement for the written contract is that if the language used to explain the contract was other than English, then the contract must be provided in that same language. So again, many Hispanic persons speaking Spanish, traditionally they get a contract in English. They may have explained to them in Spanish, but may not know what they're actually signing. Under SB 303, they must also be provided a copy of the contract in Spanish. And I think that's another very positive development for homeowners in Nevada.
Thank you. So does that conclude our C3? This one.
I have a question regarding the Bill 303. One of the last sentences talks about penalties against a contractor who does things for certain violations. Can you give me an example of a violation that would not apply and a violation that would apply for penalties?
Mr. Rosario?
For example, if they took more of a down payment than what was in the statute, for example, if they were using, the statute also requires a building permit to be obtained. I think that was put in there by the senator in order for us to be able to enforce the letter, the statute itself. So if they are going to violate any of these things, we could be looking at potentially discipline against the licensed contractor. It's not looking at revocation, but it could be a situation of a fine or something of that sort. Obviously, it would have to be something that would fit within the framework of our discipline statutes under 300 of NRS 624, but it would be any of those potential things that would not be consistent with the statute itself. So if there's a violation of it, we would be able to enforce it if, obviously, if it fit within, like I said, our disciplinary statutes under NRS 624300.
So you have kind of like a list?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was something in there to the industry to understand that if you don't follow the statute, you could be exposed to discipline by the board.
Thank you, Mr. Rosario. Member Love, I think that's you. I can't see you over there, but I think that's who I'm talking to. So there were specific provisions put into the bill that states that if they violate any of those laws concerning solar contractors, it's a fraudulent and deceitful act. So in addition to, so as far as what would apply as an offense, it's any violation of that. And then, of course, as a contractor, there would be other specific violations under our statute that would also apply. So this just makes it a fraudulent act for violating any of the provisions that's put in for solar contractors. Does that answer your question?
Kinda.
Okay.
I was just wondering, just as an example, what would be something that a contractor would do that would not substantiate a penalty for doing something inaccurate?
If it's a violation of the statute, it wouldn't matter if it was a solar contractor or not. There could possibly be a penalty imposed for that if it falls under our governing statute.
Thank you.
So shall we move on? All right, at this time, I would like to ask if there's any further board comment. All right. Any public comment? Well, no one is in the room, but if there's any public comment. And Jason, is there any public comment?
Yes, we have one public comment. User, I am unmuting your line. That caller has dropped.
All right, thank you very much. So we have asked for the public comment, and now we are moving on to the item C4. Am I beeping? No. Proactive enforcement, multi-state NASCLA stings, and Margie and David will walk us through a joint sting operation this year, or joint sting operations this year. This material will begin on page 23 of our packet. Then Margie and David will help lead our discussion.
Dave, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, sure. You know, we're always very pleased to partner with other states and industry partners, consumer groups, to conduct sting and sweep operations. And we were contacted by the National Association of State Contractors Licensing Agencies, or NASCLA, to ask if we wanted to participate with 7 other states in conducting coordinated, for the most part, sweeps throughout the country. We 8 different states. And it works well for us because it really provides an opportunity to shine a spotlight, at least that's why we've used them in the past, on these referral services, if you will. Referral services do pose a problem in California. Some work very well in vetting the contractors if they're going to be referring something, make sure they're licensed, they have workers' comp. But not all of them do. We have bulletin boards for unlicensed practitioners advertise for services for which a license is required, and they don't have the license. And that's generally what we use for this operation. It was twofold in California. It was, one, looking at the illegal advertisements and identifying sting targets, but also conducting sweeps of active construction sites. Now, NASCLA's focus was on the unlicensed practice. And when you're calling somebody out to a sting, you generally have reason to believe they're unlicensed because they're using a name style that no license exists. They don't include the license number as required by law. So for the most part, our sting operations are very effective in finding unlicensed practitioners. The sweeps, not so much, because you stop at a job site, you don't know what you're going to encounter. And the NASCLA press release, it just highlighted the unlicensed practice that we found, when in reality, through this operation, we had 130 legal actions. You know, we found 54 contractors that did not have workers' comp. We issued 30 stop orders. We have the ability in California to issue a stop order that stops employee labor if the contractor, I know some people like to call unlicensed practitioners contractors, but if the entity that's contracting for that job does not have workers' comp, we do stop the job, that employee labor. And so, you know, we're pretty proud of the numbers that we put up. Always glad to partner with Nevada on these operations. I know in years past we've done joint sting operations, and I think it was great in getting the word out. It's always a battle to make sure that the public understand that the license brings protection to consumers. I mean, it's a small price to pay for the level of protection that it provides. Also professionalizes the construction industry. So this is I think a pretty successful operation this year, and we look forward to doing it again next year.
Thank you, Dave. Well, we were pleased to participate in the NASCLA enforcement operation to combat unlicensed contracting. This year, during this sting, we conducted 121 site visits during the 3-week period, which resulted in 20 criminal citations for unlawful construction activities, 8 cases related to violation of industry regulations, and the issuance of 13 cease and desist orders, 3 criminal citations, and 4 violation letters. Mr. Rosario, would you like to share about the board's involvement in this event or highlight some of our current unlicensed contracting efforts?
Yeah, this occurred between June 7th and June 25th of this past year. And as Mr. Fote stated, it was in support of the NASCLA effort, a national effort. And I think what's I attribute to both boards here is that a number of boards across the U.S. chose not to participate, I think due to COVID. And it's affected different areas in obviously different ways. But in the past, they were more, they had much more participation from other states. But what's great is that, you know, I can say with Nevada and California, as well as I believe Arizona, Florida, Minnesota, Mississippi, North Carolina, Texas, all participated as opposed, and our numbers were very, very strong. The challenges that we faced this year, obviously with COVID, is our ability to get out there and actually work and enact these sting operations. What's very difficult is our investigators, though they are peace officers in the state of Nevada, do not carry firearms, and we do not make custodial arrests. A number of these people that in the past that we would engage during the sting operations would be individuals that may have warrants out for their arrest, may be felons, and so it is somewhat concerning for us that it's necessary for us to have a law enforcement presence with us in the event that we are come across somebody who is wanted and there's arrest warrants for them. With COVID, we found that's over the past year is that it's very difficult for law enforcement to support our operations. And the reason for that is because, as you know, Nevada gets its revenue from a big part of it is through gaming. And with gaming revenues down and tax revenues down, law enforcement really hasn't hired, as they have in the past, personnel. And with attrition rates and everything, they are not really operating at, I would say, a full complement of their personnel. It's very difficult for them to provide resources for us, dedicated resources for us for a day, let's say, for an operation. And we've had, we've had conversations with the board, trying to get whether it's Nevada Highway Patrol or the respective local law enforcement agencies to participate with us. That has been difficult. They've got their troubles, they've got their concerns themselves, And they look at this as something that, it's not a priority for them as opposed to, some of the calls that they do get and being able to service the public. So that is a hurdle for us. It's something that we're trying to overcome. But with the sting operations are effective in that, as Mr. Fote said, we are able to identify, repeat offenders, people that we've had issues with in the past, and that continue to be a problem for us to be able to sting them. And there are other ways that we can potentially do that, working cases, historical cases and things like that, where you get a consumer who is willing to testify and has, against a repeat offender like that. So we're hopeful in the future that we can better affect these sting operations. But I think what was very positive for us, that we were able to make the contact site visits at construction sites. And what we've been finding is, because of the high demand of workers out there, that contractors, licensed contractors, are bringing on people that are not licensed. And that is, that's very concerning for us, because the people that, obviously fund our board, the ones that we represent, a small percentage of them are in violation there, and we're trying to bring them back into the fold, and so they understand that they can't be doing that, because obviously their license is at risk. Obviously, when we have situations like that, discipline by the board to those licensed contractors for aiding and abetting a licensed contractor is something that we do charge and that we do pursue. So that's also a hurdle that we're dealing with, I'm sure, with the limitation of contractors out there and workers, that it's probably something that's coming across over here in California as well. So, thank you.
I have a question. Margie mentioned there were criminal charges brought during this sting operation, and I'm curious, what were the charges that you brought against the individuals during that time that warranted their arrest?
The charges would have been aiding or would have been contracting without a license. Charges that we would have filed with the respective district attorney's offices. And then we're looking at potential misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, or felony charges, depending if they've had priors or not. That's what it would be.
That was the main charge.
That would have been the main charge. It could have also been advertising without a contractor's license, unlawful, we consider unlawful advertising. If, for example, they had a business card or something of that sort, along with the fact that they were doing the work. So.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if I could, it looks like what we do in California is we issue what's known as a notice to appear in criminal court. So we have the ability to give an NTA. But I'm just wondering if Jesse Flores would want to join Paul. You could stay there. But Jesse is our Deputy Chief of Enforcement. He's also our Supervising Peace Officer. I don't know, Jesse, if you have anything you'd like to add to what's
I do.
happening with SWIFT? Okay.
Among all the successes that we have with these stings and sweeps that we conduct, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And we just held one on Tuesday and Wednesday. We had a sting this weekend. I hope to report that information to our board next week. All these criminal actions that we find, and we send to DA's office. I just talked to DAs last week, and they're conducting or considering a diversion program. So one aspect of going after people that are not licensed is, what are we really trying to achieve? Try to get them into compliance and get them licensed. So one of the diversions is to work with the DAs, because there's challenges of putting people behind bars. So what they're doing is allowing them, if they apply for a license, legitimately apply, provide the data that they have. They've been released, they may not have a mark on their license. So we can probably get, it's a double-edged sword, but we get our criminal action against a contractor, and they apply for a license and become legitimate, and they can do the work legitimately and legal in California.
I have a question through the chair. This is kind of, I guess, directed to both of you. The sting operations that were held in Nevada, like what locations were they, and were they close to the border of California?
Primarily, the visits that we were doing were at construction sites. I don't believe any of them were up in, let's say, the Incline Village area or border areas. Primarily, my understanding is they were in Clark County, and in Washoe County. Which does border California, but I'm not sure if there's anything that was a tie-over with California.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up question. So obviously Reno, Tahoe, that whole area, there is contractors probably doing unlicensed activities in both states. Is there, Register of Folk did mention joint efforts. Has that been a targeted area in the past? And as a secondary question to that, when there is information or someone is caught, let's say in Nevada, for being unlicensed, is that information shared with California, who are close to the border? Because I'm assuming at that point they are doing unlicensed activity in both states.
In the past, we've had very successful sting operations in the Lake Tahoe area with the California board. The second part of your question was relative to, what was it again? I'm sorry.
If there is someone, let's say, caught close to the border, would there be joint information shared across agencies?
The time we share joint information, it would be a situation where we cite a unlicensed contractor in California who is licensed, we cite an unlicensed contractor in Nevada who is a licensed contractor in California. And we've vice versa as well on the California side. That's where we advise the respective board, like for California, you've got a player over here who's in violation, we're citing them. And obviously if they don't pay the citation, then action can be taken on the California side. So.
We work regular with Nevada when there's a contractor that's misbehaving, if you will, and we continue to communicate, not only non-licensees, but licensees as well. So if there's a case that we can share, we often contact our counterparts over there, and we share information, regularly to allow us to be successful in our prosecution of any violator.
If I could just share an interesting story. It was a number of years ago, but we had a board member that had a house in South Lake Tahoe, and he allowed us to use that house, and we conducted joint sting operations. We had a sting one day on the California side and one day in Nevada, and we had the same unlicensed person show up at both stings. And what was so funny about it, we showed this at a board meeting. He was wearing the same clothes both days, but it was great. So we have done that in the past, and that'd be wonderful to do that again. But I'll just close by saying, just as a pitch, we're always looking for sting sites, and that's really what the key is. We have DAs that'll prosecute the cases, and we can get a house to use and make it happen.
And I would just add, even to the new board members, and I know I'm going out, but this group, NASCLA, this is a great association for us to be involved in. And Dave bringing back the information and having Nevada board here and being able to share and swap stories and swap issues and concerns. This is fantastic, and I hope that it continues. And I am like, so, this is awesome to hear about these stings going national like this, because and though it was 538 in 8 states, that might not seem like a lot, but that's huge. And it's huge in the time that we're dealing with right now, because business is booming out there, though we may not be hearing that. I can tell you, we have been more busy, and our revenue has been up during COVID more than I've ever seen in my 34 years of doing this industry. And we had to put our enforcement on hold, and so I understand what you're going through with enforcement. For some reason, for us, for licensing and building, our priority seems to be low. I wish this could hit the headlines, and we see it each morning for like a week, where the country can see how important it is of the jobs that we do and the protection that we're doing for the consumers here. This is commendable. This is so awesome to hear, and I hope that it becomes an annual thing. And you'll hear about it as you move on as a new member of the joint efforts that we have at the border like that, and how we work together. And I just hope that you keep promoting this and that this keeps happening, because this is just so awesome. I'm glad to hear it, and everybody who worked on this. I know that there's a lot of work that goes into these. I sat through a sting as a board member, and I was truly impressed the sting I was on, somebody was out at the front street, somebody was in the side yard, and somebody was inside, and they were working them just right through, and it was pretty awesome to witness and what we go through. And there are a lot of threats out there. I know that we deal with it as bill inspectors, and the level of emotions right now with COVID and all the unlicensed work that is going on out there, and we know what's going on. Emotions are pretty high right now, and so you're dealing with a lot of anger and and you never know when you're dealing with a felon or whatever. So I commend the efforts, and I'm glad you reported this back, and I hope that you continue this good work through this association, and you guys continue to report back to the board. Thank you.
So before we move on to C5, are there any further comments from the board? Are there any comments from the members of the public in the room today? Oh, no, we knew that. And Jason, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn over the C5 COVID-19 process improvements to Board Member Cavan.
And before I turn it over to Ms. Green, I just wanted to take a moment to commend the executive team and staff in Nevada for overcoming some very difficult challenges and circumstances in the past year and a half. Ms. Green's probably going to elaborate in great detail, but I will tell you that watching the operations adjust to a pandemic and still continue our day-to-day operations was really nothing short of amazing. The construction industry in Nevada did not shut down during COVID. We were considered essential, and we continued to work. So the board is really considered an industry partner, and that became even more evident during COVID. As board members, we watched our operations adjust overnight. Ms. Green, her staff, I can't even tell you the decisions that were made on a daily basis as things changed, and they were good decisions. You might have changed them the next day because something changed, but the things continued to flow very well, and that allowed our licensees and our applicants, their needs were met during COVID, which is, I think, pretty impressive. So while the board offices were closed to the public, Ms. Green and her executive staff were operating as somewhat of a skeleton crew, social distancing in the office, and others were getting up to speed working from home. So everything's going along, I thought, fairly well. Everything was being processed. We had our board meetings and hearings via Zoom. I think we only canceled one board meeting, and that was fairly early on. So we didn't miss much then. And so for the executive staff that are here, Ms. Green, Ms. Mathias, Mr. Rosario, Mr. Guesswine, I assure you that your efforts did not go unnoticed by the board or by the industry. So thank you for all the good work, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So, as mentioned, the pandemic forced us to think differently overnight about the manner in which we conduct business and provide services to the public. Some of our more significant internal improvements we've made included integration of virtual meeting capabilities. This helped improve efficiencies in time and resources almost immediately. In addition to holding our board meetings virtually, we also had great success continuing our outreach program through virtual platforms, including our Women in Construction panels, construction workforce forums, and collaborative training programs. We also continue to use a virtual format for our disciplinary proceedings and have implemented programs for providing electronic submittal of answers and evidence, etc. And we took advantage of this opportunity to streamline some of our licensing processes and create more opportunities to accept applications and license change documents electronically. Our new license applications can now be completed and submitted online, which is helping to reduce our staff processing times. The pandemic has certainly demonstrated the needs for agencies to be flexible and adaptable to new requirements almost immediately. And I'm pleased to say that even with the reduction of staff and budgetary adjustments, our board was able to sustain all levels of operation with minor issues. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'd like to have Mr. Mathias or Mr. Rosario share some details on some of our improvements if there's an interest, or also comments from our board, or if you want to wait till Dave makes his presentation to get comments on the operations, that'd be good too. Did you want to hear from them? Okay. Ms. Mathias, Mr. Rosario, do you want to come up?
Nancy Mathias for the record. You know, initially, at the beginning of COVID, we, as Ms. Green mentioned, we really had to rethink how we did business. And one of our first priorities in licensing was to make sure that our existing licensees could continue to practice. We wanted to make sure their licenses were renewed, bonds were in place. If they had been suspended and had complied with requirements, that they were reinstated and could continue on. And so that's what we focused on. But through that, we also realized that we had to take a hard look at how we processed applications and identify where we could streamline those processes, how we could gather information more effectively, either through electronic means or communicate with our applicants more effectively. And so we made a lot of changes in order to do that. Those changes have carried on, and they have been good changes for us. I think we're processing applications much more quickly than have been this past year. Some of the other areas that we looked at, we worked closely with PSI, our exam provider. After shutting down our test facilities for probably about 4 to 6 weeks, we had a fairly large backlog in exams. And so we work with them to open up evening sessions to get that caught up fairly quickly, as well as using their other facilities throughout the United States. And so in a very short time, we were able to alleviate that backlog that we had and were able to serve those applicants. Ms. Green also mentioned our online application. It's a project we've had going for some time. We were able to complete that during the pandemic and are now able to accept those applications online. Applicants can upload their supporting documents as well. And so that has streamlined our process. And we're looking forward to continuing that and making those improvements in other areas as well.
Thank you.
Obviously, the pandemic, nobody saw this coming, at least nobody that I know. It took us all by surprise. Our investigators, as well as I know some licensing staff, was out of the office for, I want to say maybe 2 months, 2 weeks? 2 weeks? Okay, 2 weeks. She's giving two. But it seemed like 2 months. But what we ended up doing, we were able to have our investigators who were working out of their houses issue them laptop computers, which we were able to purchase, and to continue their job site visits to homeowners that had filed complaints. We're able also to do virtual visits with homeowners to ensure that the work was properly done. Very similar to what North Las Vegas does through their building department on inspections. Very difficult, though, when you're talking about paint and tile and trying to look at industry standards on that point. But some of the larger stuff, we would be able to do it through photographic, evidence submitted by either the homeowner or the contractor, being able to do that. One of the things that I think was very good about having us change, Ms. Green mentioned, was the Zoom. We did not miss, she mentioned we missed, I believe, one board meeting. We did not miss one recovery fund committee meeting. which was very important for staff because we had some harmed homeowners out there that needed to get that relief, and we're able to provide that through the committee. There are disciplinary hearings. They seem to be more efficient through Zoom, not to the point where we're dealing with a very complex case, but to a point where the cases that we were having, we were able to progress those cases and adjudicate those cases, I think, in a very effective way and a very fair way for both parties, the contractor as well as the complainant. And so that taught us things that we like, as far as staff is concerned, on the disciplinary side. We do like the Zoom. We also like the fact that for the recovery fund side as well, because we were able to get more people to participate because of the fact that you're just not limited to having to come into either one of the two offices. And that really helped, I think, help those people that needed to be helped at that time. So it is a fallback for us. Recovery fund now, we are back to, the committee likes to have the complainant and the claimant there, the claimant and the respondent there if needed, in person, and that works out very well. But it was a good fallback for us that we didn't miss a step for that, and was very, very helpful. All our people have been back in the office for, I would say, way over a year now. And it's been extremely, extremely effective for us, so it's been good. And I think it's nothing but positive things for the future. I think we look at it like, change can be good sometimes, and forced change on these situations, though they're not expected, they are not planned, but it forces you to think outside the box and look at some of the alternatives that can be as, if not more effective, so.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I say a few words? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Well, certainly the onset of COVID-19 in early 2020 changed how we conduct work here in California and continues to do so today. Just like to echo Chair Kevin's remarks that really appreciate the board's support, the support of our staff to really stepping up during these challenging times. Here in California, we had 5% of our staff redirected to COVID-19 contact tracing, so they weren't available to us for over a year. Now I'm pleased to report that they have all returned. We did implement a lot of process improvements, and I think they're very exciting. Many of them were led by our Chief Deputy Registrar, Tanya Corcoran. We're fortunate to have her with us today. And Tanya, would you like to talk about some of the improvements and the closing of the offices, how we reopen with a solid plan?
Absolutely. I think the word pivot we used about 100 times a day. Every day was a challenge trying to figure it out. We weren't expecting the pandemic. And so what we did initially is we set up daily briefing meetings with the management team. Each division had different needs, staff that needed to work in the office, others that could work easily more remotely. So I think that was one of our early strategies, just to get all the concerns, issues, and discuss them daily, and to pivot daily as we needed to make our changes. We did close our public counters and test centers about 3 months in total based on stay-at-home orders and whatnot. So that did create a backlog in our testing centers. But when we were open, appreciate Justin and his team. We added evening sessions. We also converted conference rooms into additional test sites so we could make sure there was appropriate social distancing. So they worked very hard when we were open to address that backlog. With having over 400 staff, I think part of that challenge was trying to get such a large workforce remote. We were able to procure an additional 215 laptops, so a majority of the staff could work remotely. A lot of the field staff already had that equipment, so they were already remote. But pleased that we went to a virtual call center. We were able to do that, and, that's not something that we had done ever. And so there were glitches to work out, but we were able to get that up and running and keep our call center times, get those back into our normal range of around 3 minutes. Enforcement worked training with the deputy attorney generals really on how to investigate remotely and gather evidence remotely. That training occurred, and I know that there's been additional training since then, and that will be ongoing as we kind of adjust to this new normal. But one of the big things from an IT perspective is we were not online renewal at that point in time, and within about 6 weeks, we did go to online renewal for our sole owners. But in addition to that, we used to only take transaction payments here in every field office. And so we had these, what we called kiosks, where you could come in and you could pay here at a kiosk. And we were also able to move all of those transactions online. While it didn't fully automate the process, it did take care of the payment piece of being able to pay for those. So while the offices were closed, it had less of an impact to our licensees and to consumers. So I think that's just more broadly what was happening, but happy to answer any questions.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment, and that is that I got to say that you guys stepped up. It was amazing on how quickly you were still reachable. I remember I had 2 situations, enforcement issues, and though we had prioritized what needed to be done, staff was out there, staff was helping out, either whether it was over phone or through a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting, or whatever it would be. It was very helpful, and there was no disruption, and so that was helpful to us. And I just noticed that overall in services, that, I get a lot of people who would call me as a board member and typically complain, and the complaints were it's so tiny and minimum that I don't even remember but one that I had received, and it was resolved right away. So it was commendable on how quickly you all adapted and did such a great job. And as a board member with the meetings, though I appreciate Zoom and WebEx meetings, I still think that they put us in silos. I think that you don't get to have the sidebar conversations or the true networking or the body language that you need to have. But they were helpful, and they served the purpose at the time so that we could continue business. And those, you guys adapted really well. I mean, you just smoothly moved into those, and they seemed to work. And when we had glitches, we went right through it, so it was really good. So just commendable to staff, just in all areas. And I know that we had the bit with the testing, but you resolved it, and you're catching up, and you did lose a lot of staff, so it's really important. Kudos to staff, and then just thank you all for what you did during that time. It's still ongoing, and we're still catching up to what we do, so just continue that process. Thank you.
And on behalf of the board, I think I can speak for the board to say thank you for all the work that you did. Dave, Tanya, Justin, Stacy, Jason. I mean, it was pretty amazing. We were going through a lot of those financial discussions at that time, and somehow information was going back effectively. We were able to meet on the relevant issues. We made decisions, and we didn't have to dress up. That was the only really good thing, but at least not, But it's a huge operation, and it's complicated even during the best of times, and you guys stepped up, and all the staff of CSLB. It's very hard to say thank you to the whole group, but we can do so at this time. So, thank you.
Thank you. On that same note, I appreciated all my calls with Dave. We would bounce ideas off of each other of what to do and what not to do, and so it was helpful having that partnership with him too, so we could compare notes on how we would approach a subject. So, Dave, thank you again for always taking my calls and letting me vent to you on some things. But and my board and staff were both great during the whole process. It was frightening, I think, for all of us initially, but we got through it, and the industry our goal was to make sure that they could continue on, that our public could be served, and that it would be business as usual as much as possible. But thanks to everybody that assisted. Again, I couldn't thank my staff and board members enough for that, so thank you.
With that, are there any further comments from board members? Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak briefly about our business assistance program that we have that I think was really probably very useful during COVID because it started in January. So we held it fourth or third Fridays, I think is going to change from 9 to 11 o'clock. So people could go actually online, or they still can go online and do a Zoom meeting and actually find out everything they need to know about getting a contractor's license, the pitfalls, and how to fill the application out. Because I know during that time, a lot of people were very reluctant to come into the office. So I have to commend our staff for providing that service to the customer, or to the consumer out there, especially those that are trying to get a contractor's license.
There was something similar that we did at CSLB, and that was at the beginning of each month, correct?
Yeah, Justin,
Justin, please.
Justin, you want to talk about that?
Because I have to add that as a board member, we were asked to give introductory speeches, and there were, 250 people on the WebEx at that time. And so we would give an introductory speech to thank them for their interest, it was 3 minutes or something like that. And then the actual seminar started, where there was a question and answer period after that, and I watched the whole thing. Because I found there were so many things I didn't know about the business and felt it was, it was useful, but the feedback has been wonderful. So if you could describe.
Certainly, it's once upon a time before the pandemic, the first Friday of every month here in Sacramento, and I believe it was the second Friday or second Thursday in Norwalk, we had in-person meetings about how you get a license and do a Q&A. With the pandemic, thanks to the people who are making me look good right now on camera, Amy and Kevin were able to help us get that online. And Fawad Gargazalou, who's our applications manager, leads that discussion each month. And with him, Anna Rodriguez sort of puts the fear of make sure you apply into them with him. And then we spend roughly about an hour each month doing a Q&A. We're also going to be working with the Public Affairs Office so that come January, we'll be doing the same thing, but fully in Spanish. We stopped doing our Spanish service, and we definitely want to start that. But we're very much looking forward to continuing that, as well as in person once we can again.
Thank you, Justin. Are there any further comments from board members? Seeing none, are there any members of the public in the room today who wish to address the board? No, I will. And Jason, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments.
All right, thank you very much. So the next item is item agenda D, adjournment. And
Nancy.
Nancy.